Welcome, dear listener, to this quiet journey into the ancient world. As you settle into comfort, allow yourself to release the tensions of the day. Feel your breath slow, your body sink deeper into rest. Tonight, we travel back more than 3,000 years to the windswept plains of Troy, where the Aegean Sea whispers against rocky shores and the stars shine with the same brilliance they did in ages long past. This is a story not of grand battles or divine interventions, though those threads weave through it. This is a story of something deeper and more enduring, the profound bond between two souls who found in each other something irreplaceable. It is the story of Achilles and Patroclus, two men whose names have echoed through millennia, not merely for their deeds in war, but for the unwavering loyalty and tender devotion they showed one another. As we walk through their story together, imagine the soft crackle of campfires dying down to embers, the gentle rustle of tent canvas in the night breeze, and the vast canopy of stars stretching overhead like a promise that some things, love, friendship, loyalty, transcend even death itself. Let this tale carry you gently towards sleep as we discover the silent moments, the whispered conversations, and the profound connection that bound these two heroes together beneath the eternal stars. Our story begins not at Troy, but in the mountainous realm of Phthia, where King Peleus ruled with wisdom and where a young boy named Achilles grew beneath the watchful eyes of both mortal father and divine mother. Achilles, son of the sea nymph Thetis and the mortal Peleus, was marked from birth as extraordinary. His mother, desperate to protect her son from the fate she knew awaited him, had tried to make him invulnerable, dipping him in the sacred waters of the river Styx. Yet one heel, held by her anxious hand, remained untouched by those immortal waters, a single point of mortality in an otherwise nearly godlike form. But even the most exceptional souls need companions, and it was into this world of royalty and prophecy that a boy named Patroclus arrived, carrying with him a burden of grief that would shape both their destinies. Patroclus came from Opus in Locris, where his father Menoetius had been an Argonaut, a hero in his own right. But tragedy had struck the young Patroclus in a moment of childhood passion. During a heated game of dice, or in some tellings, knucklebones, a dispute arose with another boy named Cleisonimus. In a moment of rage that would haunt him for years, Patroclus struck his playmate, and the blow proved fatal. The weight of that accident, the knowledge that he had taken a life before truly understanding what life meant, transformed young Patroclus. His father, heartbroken but understanding the Greek customs that demanded exile for such crimes, took his son to the court of Peleus. It was an act of desperation and hope. Desperation because Patroclus could not remain in his homeland, and hope because Peleus was known as a just and kind ruler who might give the boy a second chance. When Patroclus first arrived at Peleus's hall, he was quiet and withdrawn, his eyes carrying a sorrow far too heavy for his young years. The other boys in the court, sons of nobles sent to be fostered and trained, kept their distance from this exile who bore the mark of an accidental killer. But Achilles, perhaps sensing something of his own isolation, for how lonely it must be to be half divine among mortals, approached Patroclus without fear or judgment. Their first conversations were halting, tentative. Achilles, already showing signs of the warrior he would become, possessed a fierce intensity that could be overwhelming. Yet with Patroclus, something softened. Perhaps it was the older boy's gentleness, his thoughtful nature, or the compassion that suffering had carved into his character. Where Achilles was quick to anger and pride, Patroclus was patient and humble. Where Achilles blazed like summer lightning, Patroclus flowed like a steady stream, cooling and constant. King Peleus, seeing the budding friendship and recognizing that his son needed someone who could temper his intensity, made Patroclus Achilles' Therapon, a word that meant companion, attendant, and something more. It was not a position of servitude, but of profound trust. Patroclus would be at Achilles' side, would learn alongside him, would grow into manhood with him. The arrangement pleased both boys, though they would never have admitted how much they had begun to need each other. Their education took them beyond the palace walls to the slopes of Mount Pelion, where the centaur Chiron lived in his cave, far from the concerns of gods and men. Chiron was unlike other centaurs, who were known for their wildness and brutality. He was wise, learned in the healing arts, music, prophecy, and the skills of war. Under his tutelage, both Achilles and Patroclus learned to hunt, to fight, to treat wounds, and to read the movements of stars. They learned to play the lyre, their fingers drawing sweet melodies from taut strings as the mountain winds sang around them. During those years on Mount Pelion, sleeping under open skies with Chiron's teachings ringing in their ears, the bond between Achilles and Patroclus deepened into something unbreakable. They shared everything: lessons, meals, dangers, triumphs, and failures. When Achilles' pride led him into recklessness, Patroclus was there with steady counsel. When Patroclus's old guilt resurfaced in nightmares, Achilles sat vigil through the dark hours, his presence alone enough to chase away the shadows. Chiron taught them medicine, showing them how to prepare poultices from herbs gathered on the mountainside, how to bind wounds, how to ease pain. Achilles took to these lessons with surprising gentleness, his swift fingers learning to heal as readily as they learned to wield a spear. Patroclus, too, absorbed this knowledge eagerly, understanding that the ability to preserve life was as noble as the ability to defend it. They would practice on each other. Achilles tending scrapes Patroclus had gotten climbing rocks, Patroclus wrapping Achilles' sprained wrist after an overly enthusiastic spear throw. The centaur also taught them the stories written in the stars. On clear nights, he would point to the heavens and name the constellations, telling them the tales of heroes and monsters, gods and mortals who had been placed among the stars as eternal reminders. Ursa Major, the great bear that had once been the nymph Callisto. Orion the hunter, forever chasing his prey across the celestial sphere. The Pleiades, those 7 sisters fleeing from pursuit. These stories fascinated both young men, and often after Chiron had retired to his cave, they would remain outside, lying on their backs on sun-warmed stones that still held the day's heat, gazing upward and creating their own patterns among the countless points of light. As they grew into young men, their bond became the subject of quiet observation among those who knew them. Some saw in their devotion the kind of profound friendship celebrated in Greek culture, the philia that bound companions in a way deeper than family, a chosen kinship that demanded absolute loyalty. Others wondered if there was something more, a love that went beyond the bounds of simple friendship. But Achilles and Patroclus themselves never seemed troubled by such categorizations. They simply were, together, 2 halves of something that felt complete only in the presence of the other. Patroclus, being slightly older, often took on a protective role despite Achilles being the superior warrior. He was the voice of reason when Achilles' temper flared, the gentle hand that could soothe the younger man's wounded pride or channel his rage into something productive. Achilles, for his part, offered Patroclus unwavering confidence and belief. He saw in Patroclus not a boy haunted by an accident, but a man of wisdom, kindness, and quiet courage. In Achilles' eyes, Patroclus' gentle nature was not weakness but strength of a different kind. The strength to remain compassionate in a harsh world, to value life even when one had taken it, to choose mercy when vengeance would be easier. When they finally returned to Peleus' court, no longer boys but young men on the cusp of destiny, it was clear to all who saw them that they were inseparable. Where Achilles went, Patroclus followed. When Patroclus spoke, Achilles listened with an attention he gave to no one else. They had their own tent even then, preferring each other's company to the crowded halls where other young nobles jostled for position and favor. In the evenings, you might find them there, Achilles playing his lyre while Patroclus tended to the small tasks of daily life, both content in a silence that spoke of absolute understanding. They could not have known, in those peaceful days in Phthia, that their bond would soon be tested in ways they could never imagine. They could not have foreseen the great war brewing across the Aegean, sparked by Paris's abduction of Helen, that would call them away from home and into legend. They could not have known that the stars they watched so peacefully would one day shine down on a battlefield where one of them would fall. But perhaps, in the deepest chambers of their hearts, they sensed that their time was not infinite. Perhaps this is why they cherished each moment, each conversation, each silent evening spent together. Perhaps this is why, when the call to war finally came, they faced it together without hesitation, knowing that whatever fate awaited them, they would meet it side by side. The call to war came like a storm sweeping down from the mountains. Word spread throughout the Greek kingdoms that Helen, wife of Menelaus of Sparta, had been taken to Troy by Paris, prince of that wealthy eastern city. It was not merely an insult to Menelaus, but an affront to all the Greek lords, for Helen's former suitors had sworn an oath to defend her husband's claim to her. King Agamemnon, Menelaus's brother and the most powerful ruler among the Greeks, began gathering an army the likes of which the world had never seen. When the call reached Phthia, Thetis, Achilles' divine mother, knew what it meant. She had always known the prophecy that hung over her son like a shadow. If Achilles went to Troy, he would win glory such as no mortal had ever achieved. His name would echo through the ages, and songs would be sung of his deeds for thousands of years. But he would never return home. He would die young, cut down in his prime, far from the land of his birth. She came to Achilles in the night, appearing from the sea foam and moonlight, her voice carrying the weight of a mother's desperate love. She told him the choice that lay before him. He could remain in Phthia, live a long and peaceful life, marry, have children, grow old beside those he loved, and die quietly in his bed surrounded by grandchildren. His name would be forgotten within a few generations, but he would have years upon years of life. Or he could go to Troy, burn bright as a star, achieve immortal glory, and die young, his life measured in quality rather than quantity. Achilles listened to his mother's words, felt the ache in her voice, understood the terror that gripped her heart. But when he looked at Patroclus, sitting quietly by the fire in their tent, he knew there was really no choice at all. How could he live a long, quiet life if it meant never testing himself, never discovering what he was truly capable of? How could he let others sail to war while he remained behind in safety? And, though he did not say this aloud, perhaps did not even fully acknowledge it to himself, how could he deny Patroclus the chance to find his own honor, to move beyond the shadow of that childhood tragedy? So Achilles chose glory over length of days. When Patroclus learned of the decision, he did not try to dissuade his friend. He simply asked, "When do we leave?" For to Patroclus, there was no question of whether he would accompany Achilles. They were bound together, and whatever fate awaited one would find them both standing side by side. Thetis, seeing that her son's mind was set, could only try to protect him in the ways available to her. She commissioned the god Hephaestus to forge armor for Achilles, pieces of such extraordinary craftsmanship that they were more art than equipment. But she also gave him counsel. "Trust Patroclus," she said, "for he would be Achilles' truest guide." In Patroclus's judgment and gentleness lay a wisdom that Achilles needed. Her divine sight showed her something of what lay ahead, though even she could not see all the paths fate might take. The gathering of the Greek fleet at Aulis was a sight to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. Ships from every corner of the Greek world assembled, their black hulls and red-sailed masts crowding the harbor. Warriors from Mycenae, Sparta, Ithaca, Argos, Athens, and countless other kingdoms came with their men, their weapons, their ambitions, and their fears. Among them came Achilles with his Myrmidons, the fierce warriors of Phthia who followed him with absolute loyalty. And at his side always was Patroclus. The voyage to Troy was long, the ships making their way across the wine-dark sea under the eyes of capricious gods. Achilles and Patroclus stood often at the prow of their vessel, watching the dolphins that raced alongside, feeling the salt spray on their faces, speaking of what awaited them. They talked of glory and honor, of the battles to come, of the stories that might be told. But they also spoke of simpler things. Memories of Mount Pelion, the taste of Chiron's cooking, the sound of the mountain streams, the feeling of grass beneath bare feet. These memories, they understood without saying, were precious now, for they were returning to a place that grew more distant with each passing wave. When the Greek fleet finally landed on the shores of Troy, dragging their ships up onto the beach and establishing a massive camp, the reality of war began to sink in. This was not going to be a quick campaign. Troy's walls were thick and high, built, some said, by the gods themselves. The city was wealthy, well-supplied, and determined to defend itself. The Greeks settled in for what would become a 10-year siege, building their camp of tents and fortifications, establishing routines, preparing for a conflict that would stretch from season to season, year to year. Achilles and the Myrmidons claimed a position near the ships, slightly apart from the other contingents. It was Achilles' way. He preferred to maintain some distance from the other leaders, particularly from Agamemnon, whose arrogance and assumption of absolute authority already chafed at the younger warrior's pride. Here, at the edge of the camp where they could hear the waves and smell the sea, Achilles and Patroclus set up their tent. It was a simple structure by necessity, but they made it a home. Patroclus had a gift for creating comfort even in harsh circumstances. He arranged their sleeping pallets with care, found ways to keep their weapons and armor properly stored, set up a small area where they could tend wounds when needed. He gathered herbs that grew near the camp, yarrow for stopping blood, willow bark for pain, lavender for its calming scent. These he hung in bunches from the tent poles, filling their space with fragrance that reminded them of more peaceful times. Achilles, for his part, brought his lyre, unwilling to leave behind all of civilization's graces even in a war camp. In the evenings, after the day's training or fighting was done, he would play while Patroclus prepared their meal or tended to small tasks. The music drew others sometimes. Young warriors from the Myrmidons who gathered outside their tent to listen, finding in those melodies a connection to home and a reminder that they were more than just instruments of war. The first months at Troy established patterns that would hold throughout the war. The Greeks would sally forth to challenge the Trojans, and the defenders would come out from their walls to meet them. Individual champions would sometimes fight duels while the armies watched. Raids were conducted on nearby allied cities, bringing back plunder and captives. The work was hard, often brutal, and the losses on both sides mounted steadily. Through it all, Achilles proved himself the greatest warrior among the Greeks. His speed was unmatched, his spear arm deadly, his courage absolute. When Achilles entered the battle, the Trojans fell back, and the Greeks surged forward with renewed confidence. His reputation grew with each engagement, and soon even the Trojan champions, including the great Hector himself, learned to recognize the distinctive armor of Peleus' son and to weigh carefully whether to face him in single combat. But for every public moment of glory, there were private moments of care. Patroclus learned to read Achilles' moods, to know when his friend needed to talk and when silence was more healing. He could see the toll that killing took, even on a warrior as skilled as Achilles. After particularly brutal days, Achilles would return to their tent spattered with blood, his eyes distant, his hands trembling slightly with aftermath of battle rage. Patroclus would have water heated, would help Achilles clean away the gore, would tend any minor wounds, would simply be present as Achilles slowly returned to himself. And Achilles, in turn, protected Patroclus in ways both obvious and subtle. He ensured that Patroclus had the best armor available, insisted that he stay near the Myrmidons who would guard him, and offered training that honed Patroclus's already considerable skills. But more than physical protection, Achilles offered belief. He trusted Patroclus's counsel in ways he trusted no one else. When other leaders made demands or suggestions, Achilles might bristle with pride, but when Patroclus spoke, Achilles listened. Their tent became a place apart from the harsh realities of the camp, not a retreat from duty, but a sanctuary where they could remember who they were beyond warriors. Here, they could speak of philosophy and poetry, could debate questions of honor and fate, could share fears they would never voice to anyone else. Here, Patroclus could admit his uncertainty about his own courage, and Achilles could confess his occasional doubts about the glory they were seeking. Here, they were not legendary warriors, but simply two men who had chosen to face an uncertain future together. As the first year at Troy turned into the second, and then the third, a routine settled over the camp. The war had become a grinding stalemate, with neither side able to gain decisive advantage. Troy's walls remained impregnable, but the Greeks controlled the surrounding territory and showed no signs of giving up. The initial excitement of adventure had long since faded, replaced by the tedium of long days and longer years far from home. But through it all, the bond between Achilles and Patroclus remained the one constant, the one thing that neither time nor hardship could erode. They had traveled far from the peaceful mountains of Phthia, far from the innocent days of their youth. Yet in the most essential ways, they remained what they had always been to each other: anchor and sail, shield and spear, the fixed star by which the other navigated, the presence that made any burden bearable. The Greek camp at Troy sprawled across the beach like a temporary city, a place of tents and cooking fires, weapons racks and makeshift training grounds. For 10 long years, this would be home for thousands of warriors, and out of necessity, routines developed that gave shape to the shapeless days of a war with no clear end in sight. Achilles and Patroclus rose with the sun most mornings, the light filtering through the canvas of their tent to wake them gently. The first sounds of day were the cry of seabirds wheeling overhead, the crash of waves on the shore, and the gradual stirring of the camp as men emerged from their tents to face another day. There was comfort in these rhythms, in the predictability that counterbalanced the chaos of battle. Their morning routine rarely varied. Patroclus would rise first, moving quietly to let Achilles sleep a few minutes longer. He would step outside to splash his face with water from the barrel they kept by the tent entrance, would breathe deeply of the salt air, would take a moment to observe the sky and predict the day's weather. Then he would prepare a simple breakfast, barley cakes, perhaps, with honey if they had it, dried fruit, watered wine. The smell of food would draw Achilles from sleep, and he would emerge, his golden hair tousled, his legendary armor replaced for now with a simple tunic. They would eat together, sitting on stools outside their tent if the weather permitted, watching the camp come fully to life around them. Patroclus might discuss what needed doing that day: weapons to be sharpened, armor to be checked, messages from other leaders to be answered. Achilles would listen, adding his own thoughts, making decisions about training schedules for the Myrmidons or whether to lead a raid on a nearby Trojan allied village. The Myrmidons themselves looked to both men for leadership, though in different ways. They revered Achilles as their warrior prince, the unbeatable champion whose presence made them feel invincible. But they also respected Patroclus, whose steady judgment and genuine concern for their welfare earned their loyalty. When a young soldier was homesick, it was Patroclus who would sit with him and speak of Phthia. When disputes arose among the men, Patroclus would mediate with a fairness that left both parties satisfied. Achilles might be their sword, but Patroclus was their heart. Medical care fell naturally to them both, thanks to Chiron's teachings on Mount Pelion. The Greek camp had Aegean and Patroclus, the sons of Asclepius, as official physicians, but they could not be everywhere at once. Achilles and Patroclus became known for their healing skills, and warriors from other contingents would sometimes come to their tents seeking treatment for wounds that the official physicians were too busy to address. Patroclus took particular care with this work. He would clean wounds thoroughly, applying remedies he had prepared from the herbs he gathered. Yarrow to stop bleeding, comfort to aid healing, willow bark tea to ease pain. His touch was gentle but confident, and he had learned the art of distraction, keeping wounded men talking so they would not focus on their pain. Achilles assisted, his nimble fingers as adept at stitching flesh as they were at wielding a spear. Together, they saved lives that might have been lost to infection or neglect. Training occupied much of their days, for the Myrmidons needed to stay sharp, and there were always young warriors eager to learn from the greatest fighter among the Greeks. Achilles would lead exercises in spear work, sword technique, wrestling, and footwork. He was a demanding teacher, accepting nothing but the best effort, but also surprisingly patient when he saw genuine commitment. Patroclus would often watch these sessions, offering encouragement to struggling soldiers, praising improvement, ensuring that water and rest were available. But Achilles trained with Patroclus alone, away from the eyes of others. These private sessions were different, not performances of skill but genuine partnerships where each could push the other to improve. They sparred with blunted weapons, their movements so practiced that they could fight at near full speed without fear of truly injuring each other. Patroclus, though not Achilles' equal in raw ability, was skilled enough to offer real challenge, and Achilles valued these sessions precisely because Patroclus did not simply defer to his superiority. Meals were communal affairs for the most part, with the Myrmidons eating together while Achilles and Patroclus often joined them. But evenings were their own, and they would retire to their tent as the sun set, leaving the revelry and conversation of the camp behind. Here, in the privacy of their space, they could shed the mantles of leadership and simply be themselves. Achilles would often play his lyre, the music filling their tent with beauty that seemed impossible in such a place of war. He would sing sometimes, his voice clear and true, songs learned in Pelion or composed here on Troy's shores. Patroclus would listen, sometimes mending clothes or tending to small tasks, sometimes simply sitting still with his eyes closed, letting the music wash over him. They talked, of course, endlessly, not just of war and strategy, though those topics came up often enough, but of everything else: philosophy, poetry, theology, memory, hope. They debated whether the gods truly cared about human affairs or whether mortals were simply pieces in divine games. They wondered about the nature of glory and whether fame after death was truly worth the price paid in life. They spoke of home, of Phthya's mountains and clear streams, of Peleus growing old without his son, of lives they might have lived if Paris had never met Helen. Patroclus was the more thoughtful of the two, prone to examining questions from multiple angles, considering implications and consequences. His wisdom was hard-won, born from having learned early that actions have costs that cannot be undone. Achilles, blessed with near invulnerability and supreme confidence, sometimes struggled to understand restraint, but he valued Patroclus's perspective precisely because it differed from his own. Where Achilles saw glory, Patroclus saw cost. Where Achilles burned with certainty, Patroclus counseled caution. They balanced each other, and they knew it. Physical affection came naturally to them, as it did to many Greek warriors. They were not afraid to embrace, to touch shoulders or arms when making a point, to sit close together when discussing serious matters. In a culture that celebrated the bonds between fighting men, where shields protected not just the individual but the warrior beside them, such closeness was not just accepted but expected. Achilles and Patroclus had grown up together, had trained together, had faced danger together. Their comfort with each other was absolute and unthinking. When wounds needed tending, they cared for each other with practiced ease. Patroclus would clean and dress a cut on Achilles' arm, his fingers gentle but efficient. Achilles would massage Patroclus' sore shoulders after a day of hard training, his strong hands knowing exactly where tension gathered. These moments of physical care were expressions of trust and devotion deeper than words. Sleep, too, was shared companionably. Their tent held 2 pallets, arranged close together so they could talk in the darkness if they wished. Sometimes they would lie awake for hours, voices quiet, speaking of things they would not say in daylight. Sometimes they simply took comfort in the sound of each other's breathing, the knowledge that neither was alone. When nightmares came, and they did, for war leaves scars on the mind as well as the body, the presence of the other was enough to chase away the worst of the shadows. The routine was broken by battles, of course. When the call came to arm themselves and march out to meet the Trojans, everything shifted into high alert. But even here, patterns emerged. Achilles would don his magnificent armor, the divine craftsmanship gleaming in the sunlight, transforming him from a young man into something more, a living embodiment of war itself. Patroclus would help him with the final adjustments, checking that every strap was secure, every piece properly seated. And Achilles, in turn, would see to Patroclus's armor, ensuring that his dearest friend was as protected as possible. Before battle, they had a ritual. They would stand facing each other for a moment, hands on each other's shoulders, no words needed. It was a silent acknowledgement of what they meant to each other, a recognition that this battle might be their last, a wordless promise to fight with all their skill and return if the gods allowed it. Then they would turn and lead the Myrmidons out, and the killing would begin. After battles, when they had survived another day, there was an unburdening. Blood had to be washed away, armor cleaned and checked for damage, weapons sharpened, but also the weight of what they had done had to be set down somehow. Patroclus had a gift for this. He could listen to Achilles describe the chaos of battle, the faces of those he had killed, the moment when rage overtook reason, and he would not judge or recoil. He would simply listen, and in listening, help Achilles process what could not be changed but needed to be acknowledged. And Achilles did the same for Patroclus, for even gentle souls must do hard things in war. When Patroclus took a life in battle, when he saw young men his own age fall beneath weapons, when the horror of it all threatened to overwhelm him, Achilles was there. He reminded Patroclus that they fought for their friends, for each other, for survival. He helped Patroclus see that there was no shame in feeling the weight of taking life. Indeed, that the capacity to feel that weight was what kept them human in a dehumanizing enterprise. The years passed in this way, seasons cycling through heat and cold, wet and dry. They celebrated victories, however small. They mourned losses, for the Myrmidons were not invincible, and good men fell to Trojan spears and arrows. They adjusted to the reality that this war would not end quickly, that glory was not a single bright moment but a long series of days, many of them tedious, some of them terrible, occasionally one that reminded them why they had come. Through all of it, the presence of the other made everything bearable. Achilles might be the greatest warrior of his age, but without Patroclus, he would have been incomplete, all rage and pride with no wisdom to guide them. Patroclus might be gentle and thoughtful, but without Achilles, he would have lacked purpose, would have remained always in the shadow of that childhood mistake. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts, two souls that fit together so perfectly that observers sometimes wondered if the gods had designed them specifically to complement each other. But of all their routines, all their shared experiences, Nothing was more important to Achilles and Patroclus than the quiet hours they spent together beneath the vast canopy of stars. When the camp had settled into sleep, when the fires had burned down to embers, when even the sentries paced their rounds in drowsy silence, the two friends would often emerge from their tent to sit outside and gaze upward at the ancient dance of celestial lights. The nights in Troy were clear more often than not, the Mediterranean sky offering an unobstructed view of the heavens. Far from the lamps of civilization, with only the dim glow of dying campfires to compete with starlight, the full glory of the cosmos revealed itself. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light, that mysterious band the Greeks called the Road of the Gods. Individual stars burned with a brilliance that city dwellers would never witness, each one sharp and distinct, pulsing with light that had begun its journey across the void long before any human had walked the earth. Achilles and Patroclus would spread a blanket outside their tent, or simply lie back on the still warm sand if the weather permitted, and let the universe unfold above them. They had done this since their days on Mount Pelion with Chiron, and the habit had followed them to Troy, becoming a ritual more sacred than any they performed in temples. "Look," Patroclus would say, pointing, "Orion rises." And there the great hunter would be, that unmistakable pattern of stars that marked the turning of seasons. 3 bright stars formed his belt, while others sketched out his broad shoulders and raised arm. According to Chiron's teaching, Orion had been a mighty hunter who claimed he could kill any beast on Earth, and for that hubris, the Earth goddess Gaia had sent a scorpion to kill him. The gods, moved by either pity or admiration, had placed both hunter and scorpion in the sky, but at opposite ends so they could never meet again. As Orion rose in the east, Scorpius set in the west, an eternal chase with neither ever catching the other. "Do you think he regrets his boast?" Achilles would ask, studying the constellation. If he could have those moments back, would he swallow his pride and live? Patroclus would consider this seriously, as he did most of Achilles' questions. "I think," he would say slowly, "that Orion would not have been Orion if he had been able to hold his tongue. His pride was part of what made him great. Perhaps the lesson is not that we should never be proud, but that pride has a cost, and we must decide if we're willing to pay it." It was this kind of conversation they would have, voices low, the stars as their witnesses. Heavy questions that had no easy answers, explored not to reach conclusions but simply to think deeply about the nature of existence, fate, choice, and consequence. They spoke of these things to each other in ways they could speak to no one else, for there was no judgment between them, no need to maintain the facade of certainty that leaders must project. They would trace other constellations, Ursa Major, the Great Bear, circling eternally around the pole star, never dipping below the horizon. The Greeks saw in this constellation the nymph Callisto, transformed into a bear by jealous Hera and placed in the sky by Zeus. Nearby was Ursa Minor, the little bear, said to be Callisto's son Arcus. Mother and child, forever separated yet forever together in the heavens. "My mother told me once," Achilles said one night, his voice carrying a note of something Patroclus had learned to recognize as grief held at bay, "that she wanted to make me fully divine, to take me to Olympus and plead with Zeus to grant me immortality. But my father refused. He said that a life lived among the gods, where nothing matters because nothing can be lost, would be no life at all. That mortality is what gives meaning to our choices." Patroclus reached over and found Achilles' hand in the darkness, their fingers intertwining in a gesture so familiar it required no thought. "Do you think he was right?" "I don't know," Achilles admitted. "Sometimes I think immortality would be a blessing, to never fear death, to have endless time to learn and grow and experience. But then I think about this moment here with you, and I realize that it matters precisely because it won't last forever. If we had infinite nights to lie here and watch the stars, Would any single night mean as much? Perhaps not, Patroclus agreed softly. Perhaps the shadow of death is what makes life luminous. These were the kinds of thoughts that filled their silent hours beneath the stars, profound meditations on existence that neither rushed through nor forced to conclusion. They could sit for long stretches without speaking at all, simply absorbing the immensity of the cosmos, feeling their own smallness in the face of such vastness, and yet somehow not diminished by it. Instead, they found strange comfort in their insignificance, in the knowledge that their troubles, however large they loomed in the moment, were transient things beneath the eternal stars. They would pick out the Pleiades, that cluster of 7 sisters fleeing from Orion's pursuit, now safe forever in their celestial refuge. They would find Cassiopeia, that distinctive W shape formed by the vain queen who had boasted of her beauty and now sat chained to her throne, forever circling the pole. They would identify Cygnus, the swan, and debate whether it represented Zeus in disguise, seducing Leda, or the tragic sickness, transformed by grief into a bird. Sometimes they would make up their own constellations, pointing out patterns that the ancient astronomers had missed or ignored. There, Achilles would say, tracing an irregular pattern with his finger, "Those 7 stars, that's the tent. Can you see it? And that one to the side is the fire, and those 2 bright ones are us, sitting outside." Patroclus would laugh quietly. "You're seeing what you want to see, not what's there. Isn't that what all constellations are?" Achilles would counter. The ancients looked up and saw hunters and bears and dragons, but really stars are just stars. We make the patterns. We create the meaning. "Then let's create one," Patroclus would say. "What about those 4 stars there forming a square? What do you see?" "A shield," Achilles would answer immediately. "Or a door, or a window looking out onto infinity." "Always war with you," Patroclus would tease gently. "I see a table laden with food. I see a family gathered around for a meal in Phthia, laughing together. You're homesick." Achilles would observe, no mockery in his voice, only understanding. "Always," Patroclus would admit, "but less so when we do this. When we're here like this, I feel like I am home. Home isn't a place. It's being with the people who matter." These confessions came more easily under the stars, perhaps because they could look upward rather than at each other, perhaps because the darkness gave a sense of privacy even under the open sky. They could speak of fears they would never voice in daylight. Achilles' dread that his death would be meaningless, just another body on the battlefield despite all the prophecies. Patroclus' terror that he would fail Achilles in some crucial moment, that his old weakness would return and prove him unworthy of the trust placed in him. "You could never disappoint me," Achilles would assure him fiercely. "Never. You are the only person in this world I trust completely, the only one whose counsel I value above my own instincts. If I die here, let it be known that Patroclus was my truest companion, the one who made me better than I would have been alone." "Don't speak of dying," Patroclus would reply, voice tight. "Not here. Not now. We have this moment. That's enough." And Achilles would relent, because he could deny Patroclus nothing, and they would return to safer topics, the movements of planets, visible now and then among the fixed stars, wandering their mysterious paths. Mars, red as blood, the war god's color. Venus, brightest of all, the evening and morning star that heralded sunset and sunrise. Jupiter, stately in its slow progression through the zodiac. They would wonder what these wandering stars were, why they moved differently than the others, whether the old stories that called them gods were true or merely poetry. On nights when the moon was dark, they could see the most stars, the sky so thick with light that it seemed impossible to find space between the points. On nights when the moon was full, its silver light would wash out all but the brightest stars, but it would paint the camp in shades of gray and shadow, beautiful in its own way. They learned to appreciate both kinds of night, finding different moods in each. Sometimes they would be silent for hours, no words needed, their companionship so complete that speech was unnecessary. The sound of waves provided a constant rhythm, the occasional call of a night bird or the distant challenge of a sentry marking the passage of time. They would watch for shooting stars, making silent wishes when one streaked across the sky, though neither would tell the other what they wished for. Once, Patroclus asked, "What do you think happens to us after we die? Do we truly go to Hades, as the priests say? Do we become shadows, forever separated from the light and warmth of life?" Achilles was quiet for a long time before answering. "I hope," he said finally, "that whatever comes after, we're together. I can't imagine an afterlife worth having if you're not there. Even Elysium would be empty without you." "Then we'll make sure to die at the same time," Patroclus said, attempting lightness though his voice shook slightly. "That way we can argue with Hades together, demand accommodations that suit us." "Or," Achilles said, and now there was a smile in his voice though his eyes remained serious, "we'll simply refuse to be separated. Death will have to take us both or neither. We'll make it so." It was a fantasy, they both knew, the kind of brave talk that gave comfort in dark moments. But perhaps there was truth in it too. Their bond had become so fundamental to who they were that the idea of existing without the other seemed not just painful but impossible, like asking a body to survive without a heart. On clear nights when sleep eluded them both, they might stay out until the stars began to fade, watching the slow wheel of the heavens complete another turn. They would see Orion sink toward the western horizon, making room for the summer constellations. They would watch the Milky Way shift position, that river of light rotating around the pole. And as the first hints of dawn touched the eastern sky, turning it from black to deep blue to pale lavender, they would finally rise, stiff from lying on the ground, and return to their tent for a few hours of sleep before the day began again. These silent moments under the stars were not escapes from reality but acknowledgments of it. They were reminders that the war, despite consuming their present, was not all that they were. They were opportunities to remember who they had been before Troy and to imagine who they might have become if fate had written a different story. They were chances to speak truths that could not be spoken in the camp, to show vulnerability that would have been seen as weakness anywhere else. Most of all, they were affirmations of the bond between them. A bond deeper than brotherhood, more chosen than family, more profound than simple friendship. Under those stars, Achilles and Patroclus were not warriors or leaders or legendary figures. They were simply two souls who had found in each other something irreplaceable, who had chosen each other again and again, who would continue choosing each other until fate itself intervened. And the stars looked down on them with the same light that had shone on countless other pairs throughout history, other lovers and friends and companions who had gazed upward and felt the same mixture of insignificance and meaning, mortality and transcendence. The stars did not judge or interfere. They simply witnessed, eternal and unchanging, while beneath them, brief mortal lives blazed bright and then were gone, leaving only memories and legends behind. The breaking point came in the 10th year of the war, during a raid on Chryse, one of Troy's allied cities. Agamemnon had led the expedition, seeking plunder and glory, and among the captives taken was Chryses, daughter of Chryses, who was a priest of Apollo. By the cruel custom of war, Chryses became Agamemnon's prize, assigned to him as spoils of victory despite her father's desperate pleas and offers of ransom. But Chryses was no ordinary priest. He was beloved of Apollo, and the god heard his prayers for vengeance. A plague descended on the Greek camp, a pestilence that struck without warning and killed without mercy. For 9 days, the sickness spread, men dying in agony while the physicians worked themselves to exhaustion trying to tend the afflicted. Even Achilles and Patroclus, with all their healing knowledge, could do little against a divine curse. On the 10th day, Achilles called an assembly, demanding that the army's seers determine the cause of the plague. The seer Calchas, granted protection by Achilles' promise, revealed the truth. Apollo was punishing the Greeks for Agamemnon's refusal to return Chryseis to her father. The only solution was to give up the girl, unransomed and with full honors. Agamemnon, his pride wounded by this public rebuke, agreed to return Chryseis, but demanded compensation for his loss. His eyes fell on Briseis, a captive woman who had been awarded to Achilles, and he declared that he would take her to replace the prize he was surrendering. It was his right as commander, he claimed, to redistribute war prizes as he saw fit. The insult was deliberate and profound. Agamemnon was not just taking a captive. He was publicly humiliating Achilles, demonstrating that even the greatest warrior was subordinate to him. It was a flexing of power, an assertion of authority, and a slap in the face to a man whose pride was as legendary as his prowess. Achilles' rage was immediate and terrible. His hand went to his sword, and for a moment it seemed he would cut Agamemnon down where he stood, consequences be damned. The entire assembly held its breath, warriors frozen, watching to see if the Greek alliance would shatter right there. But then Patroclus was there, a hand on Achilles' arm, not restraining but reminding, and Athena herself appeared to Achilles alone, counseling patience. Achilles did not kill Agamemnon, but he did withdraw from the war. If Agamemnon wanted to dishonor him, wanted to claim the authority to take what he had rightfully earned, then Agamemnon could fight his war without him. Achilles and the Myrmidons would remain in their camp, would not take the field, would watch as the other Greeks struggled without their greatest champion. It was a decision that would have cascading consequences, but in that moment, it felt like the only choice possible to Achilles. His honor had been trampled, his worth reduced to nothing in front of the entire army. To continue fighting would be to accept that treatment, to say that he could be insulted with impunity. No, he would make Agamemnon, make all the Greeks, understand what his absence meant. They would learn, through suffering, what they had lost in spurning him. Patroclus understood the depth of Achilles' hurt, but he also saw the trap his friend was walking into. Back in their tent, as Achilles paced like a caged lion, Patroclus tried to reason with him. "I know you're wounded," Patroclus said quietly. "Agamemnon's action was shameful, and his treatment of you was unjust. But think about what you're doing. The Myrmidons look to you for leadership. The other Greeks rely on your strength in battle. How many men will die because you're not there to protect them?" "That's not my concern," Achilles snapped, though there was pain beneath the anger. "Let them die. Let Agamemnon see the consequences of his arrogance. Let him understand what I'm worth." "And what about the Myrmidons?" Patroclus pressed. "What about the friends we've made here, the men who fought beside us for 10 years? Shall they suffer for Agamemnon's sins?" Achilles whirled on him, eyes blazing. "What would you have me do? Swallow the insult? Go crawling back and accept his authority? I am Achilles, son of Peleus and Thetis. I am the greatest warrior the Greeks have. I will not be treated as a common soldier to be commanded and punished at will." "I know who you are," Patroclus said, and his voice was steady despite the storm raging before him. "I've always known, but I also know that you're more than just pride and anger. You're capable of seeing beyond your own hurt to the larger picture. This war will not be won by withdrawal." "Then it won't be won," Achilles declared. "I don't care. Let Troy stand forever. Let the Greeks sail home in shame. None of it matters if I'm to be dishonored and dismissed like this." Patroclus fell silent, recognizing that in this mood, Achilles was beyond reason. The wound was too fresh, the anger too hot. So he simply stayed close, a presence more than an arguer, and gradually Achilles' pacing slowed, his fury burning down to a cold, hard resolution. "I won't fight," Achilles said finally. "Not until Agamemnon begs forgiveness, not until he admits he was wrong, not until he offers recompense that acknowledges my worth. The Myrmidons will follow my lead. We'll remain here, by our ships, and the war can go on without us." And so it did. Achilles and the Myrmidons withdrew from the fighting, remaining in their section of the camp while the other Greeks continued the siege. At first, the army seemed to manage well enough. Other champions stepped forward to fill the void. Ajax, Diomedes, Odysseus, and the war ground on as it had for years. But as time passed, the absence of Achilles began to tell. The Trojans, emboldened by the greatest Greek warrior's withdrawal, pressed their attacks with renewed vigor. Hector, Troy's champion, led assault after assault, driving the Greeks back, winning victory after victory. The siege, which had been a grinding stalemate, suddenly tipped in Troy's favor. The Greeks found themselves pushed back toward their ships, defending their own camp, in danger of complete defeat. During these dark days, Patroclus watched his friend with growing concern. Achilles remained adamant in his refusal to fight, his pride like steel, unyielding. But Patroclus could see the cost of that refusal in the lines that appeared on Achilles' face, in the way he would stand at the edge of their camp staring toward the battlefield where he could hear but not see the fighting, in the tension that never left his shoulders. Embassies came from Agamemnon, finally willing to negotiate. Odysseus, Ajax, and Phoenix, Achilles' old tutor, came to the tent with lavish gifts and promises of honor restored. They begged Achilles to return to the fighting, painting vivid pictures of the Greeks' desperate situation, appealing to his sense of duty, his compassion, his desire for glory. Patroclus sat silently during these negotiations, watching Achilles' face, seeing the war between pride and guilt playing out in his friend's eyes. When Odysseus finished his eloquent plea, when Ajax had made his blunt appeal to simple duty, when Phoenix had invoked the bond between mentor and student, all eyes turned to Achilles. "No," he said simply, "I will not fight for Agamemnon. He dishonored me publicly, and he has not offered sufficient recompense. When he is willing to prostrate himself before me, when he admits his fault before the entire army, then I might consider relenting. Until then, I stay here." The embassy left empty-handed, and in their wake, Patroclus and Achilles sat in heavy silence. "They're dying," Patroclus said finally. "Men we know, warriors who fought beside us for years. They're dying, and we could save them." "I know," Achilles said, and there was agony in his voice though his jaw remained set. "But I can't. Don't you see? If I go back now, after everything, it means that I can be insulted with impunity, that my honor means nothing, that I'm just a weapon to be used and discarded. I have to hold firm. Agamemnon must understand that he was wrong. And if the Greeks are destroyed while you're teaching him that lesson?" Patroclus asked quietly. "If Troy wins because you're nursing your wounded pride?" "It's not just pride," Achilles burst out. "It's about being respected, about being valued for who I am and not just what I can do. It's about the fact that I came here, knowing I would die, and the thanks I get is to have my prizes stolen and my worth dismissed." "I know," Patroclus said again, and he moved closer, placing a hand on Achilles' shoulder. "I know it's not just pride, but I also know that you'll never forgive yourself if the Greeks fall because you weren't there to defend them. This anger, justified as it is eating you alive. I can see it. Every day you stand here, hearing the fighting, knowing you could end it. It's destroying something in you. Then let it destroy me, Achilles said bitterly. Let it all burn. I don't care anymore. But Patroclus knew that was a lie. He could see how much Achilles cared, how the conflict between pride and duty was tearing him apart. So Patroclus did what he had always done. He stayed close, offered his presence, his understanding, his unwavering loyalty. If Achilles could not or would not bend, then Patroclus would remain at his side through whatever consequences followed. They still sat under the stars in the evenings, but the conversations were different now, heavier, as though the weight of all those dying men had settled onto their shoulders. Achilles would speak of the impossibility of his position, of feeling trapped between equally terrible choices. Patroclus would listen, offering no easy answers because there were none to give. And as the Trojans pressed their advantage, as the Greeks fell back farther and farther, as the ships themselves came under threat, a terrible plan began to form in Patroclus's mind. A plan that would prove the turning point of the entire war, though not in the way anyone expected. The Trojans were at the ships. After days of relentless assault, Hector had led his forces all the way through the Greek fortifications to the beach itself, and now they were setting fire to the vessels that represented the Greeks' only means of escape. Black smoke rose into the sky, visible from Achilles' tent, and the sounds of battle, the clash of bronze on bronze, the screams of wounded and dying men, the roar of flames, carried clearly on the wind. Achilles stood at the edge of their camp, watching that smoke rise, his face a mask that could not quite hide the turmoil beneath. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. His legendary armor sat unused in the tent behind him. The Myrmidons, restless and eager, waited for word from their leader, but that word did not come. Achilles' pride held firm, even as everything he had fought for burned. Patroclus watched his friend and felt his heart break. He understood Achilles' position, understood why the slight from Agamemnon had cut so deep. But he also saw clearly what Achilles could not or would not acknowledge, that by remaining inactive, Achilles was losing the very thing he sought to protect. His honor would mean nothing if the Greeks were annihilated while he stood by. Glory could not be won by absence. So Patroclus made his choice, perhaps the hardest choice of his life. He approached Achilles, his voice calm despite the desperation he felt. "The ships are burning," he said unnecessarily. They could both see the smoke, both smell it on the wind. "I know," Achilles replied, not turning. "How much longer will you wait? Until they're all dead? Until Troy has achieved complete victory? Until Agamemnon comes to me on his knees?" Achilles said, but there was less conviction in his voice than there had been, doubt finally beginning to crack that adamantine pride. Patroclus took a breath, steadying himself for what he was about to propose. "Then let me go in your place." Now Achilles did turn, confusion and horror warring on his face. "What? Give me your armor," Patroclus said, the words coming faster now. "Let me lead the Myrmidons to battle. The Trojans need only think you've returned to the fight, and they'll break. They fear you more than all the other Greeks combined. I don't need to actually be you. I just need them to believe you've ended your withdrawal." "No," Achilles said immediately. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. If something happened to you, something will happen to all of us if we don't act," Patroclus interrupted, which he rarely did. "The ships are burning, Achilles. Once they're gone, we're trapped here. We'll die on these shores, every one of us, and Troy will stand forever. Is that the glory you seek? To be remembered as the warrior who let pride cost the Greeks everything." Achilles turned away again, his jaw working, struggling with the impossible position in which he found himself. "I can't," he said finally. "I can't break my oath. I said I wouldn't fight until Agamemnon acknowledges what he did. And I meant it. You won't be fighting, Patroclus said carefully. I will. You'll stay here, your honor intact, your pride uncompromised. But the Myrmidons will ride to battle, and maybe, just maybe, we can save what's left of the army. The silence stretched between them, heavy with all the things neither wanted to say. Finally, Achilles spoke, his voice rough. You're asking me to let you risk your life for my stubbornness. I'm asking you to let me help save our friends, Patroclus corrected gently. This isn't about your stubbornness. It's about doing what's necessary, what's right. You can't see past your anger right now, so let me see for you. Let me be your wisdom, as I've always been. Achilles was quiet for a long moment, and Patroclus could see the war raging behind his eyes. Pride versus guilt, anger versus love, the competing demands of honor and compassion. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. If I let you do this, you have to promise me something. Anything, Patroclus said. You drive the Trojans back from the ships and then you return immediately. You don't chase them all the way to Troy's walls. You don't engage Hector. You save the ships and come back. Do you understand? That's the deal. I understand, Patroclus said, though part of him wondered if such a promise could be kept in the chaos of battle. So Achilles agreed, and they went to his tent where the magnificent armor lay unused. Piece by piece, Patroclus donned it, the breastplate that had been forged by gods, the greaves that shone like stars, the helmet with its towering crest. The armor was heavy, heavier than anything Patroclus usually wore, but it fit well enough. When he took up the legendary spear that only Achilles could wield properly, he felt transformed, as though by wearing this armor, he had become someone else, something more. Achilles helped him with the final adjustments, his hands lingering on each strap, each buckle, as though by touch he could transfer some protection to his dearest friend. When the armor was secured, when Patroclus looked every bit the part of the legendary Achilles, they stood facing each other in the dimness of the tent. Remember your promise, Achilles said, and his voice was urgent now, touched with fear. Drive them back and return. Don't try to be a hero. Don't let battle rage carry you too far. Come back to me. I will, Patroclus promised, and he believed it in that moment. He had no desire to be a hero, no hunger for glory. He simply wanted to save his friends, to stop the slaughter, to do the right thing when the greatest warrior in Greece could not. They embraced then, a fierce grip that spoke volumes. Come back to me, Achilles said again, and Patroclus felt the tremor in his friend's voice, the fear that Achilles would not allow himself to fully acknowledge. I will, Patroclus said again. Wait for me here. This won't take long. He turned to leave the tent, to lead the Myrmidons into battle, and he did not look back. If he had seen the expression on Achilles' face, the dawning realization that he was making a terrible mistake, the sudden understanding that pride was not worth this cost, he might have stopped. He might have removed the armor and stayed. But he did not look back, and the moment passed, and fate sealed itself into place. The Myrmidons received him with joy, believing their beloved Achilles had finally returned to the fight. Patroclus did not correct them, merely raised the famous spear and led them toward the battlefield. Behind him, Achilles stood watching, and the dread that gripped his heart should have been warning enough. But he let Patroclus go anyway, and that choice would haunt him for the rest of his short life. The battle was chaos, as battles always are. Patroclus led the Myrmidons into the fray, and the effect was immediate and dramatic. The Trojans, seeing the armor of Achilles, believing the greatest warrior had returned, fell back in terror. The fire that threatened the ships was extinguished. The Greeks rallied, pushing forward with renewed courage, And Patroclus, caught up in the momentum of victory, in the surge of battle rage that overtakes even gentle souls in combat, forgot his promise. He pressed forward when he should have pulled back, chased the Trojans when he should have held position, drove toward Troy's walls in pursuit of glory and decisive victory. He killed many that day, including Sarpedon, a son of Zeus himself, and the gods watched and knew that fate was being written in blood. Hector, Troy's greatest champion, saw the warrior in Achilles' armor cutting through Trojan ranks, and he moved to intercept. Apollo himself intervened, striking Patroclus from behind, dazing him, knocking the helmet from his head. A Trojan warrior named Euphorbus wounded him from behind with a spear, and then Hector was there, and his spear found the gap in the armor, and Patroclus fell. As he lay dying in the dust, Patroclus looked up at Hector and with his final breaths delivered a prophecy. "You boast of killing me, but you are not long for this world. Achilles will soon take his vengeance, and you will fall before his spear. Death already waits for you." Then Patroclus closed his eyes, and the breath left his body, and the gentlest soul to walk the battlefield of Troy departed for the shadowy halls of Hades. The fighting that raged over his body was fierce. The Greeks, realizing what had happened, fought desperately to retrieve their fallen companion. The Trojans, led by Hector, tried with equal desperation to strip the famous armor and claim the body as a trophy. Eventually, the Greeks prevailed, though the armor was lost, and they bore Patroclus's body back toward the ships, toward the tent where Achilles waited. Antilochus, fleet-footed messenger, was sent ahead to break the news. He found Achilles pacing outside his tent, anxiety plain on his face, and the words that Antilochus spoke shattered what remained of Achilles' world. "Patroclus is dead. Hector has slain him and taken your armor. The Greeks have barely managed to save his body." The sound that came from Achilles was not human. It was something primordial, a howl of such agony that it carried across the entire camp and struck fear into the hearts of all who heard it. He collapsed to his knees, both hands clutching dirt and ashes, rubbing them into his face, tearing at his hair, beating the ground with his fists. The famous golden hair became matted with dust and tears. The strong hands that had never trembled in battle shook uncontrollably. Antilochus stood by helplessly, weeping himself, afraid that Achilles might take his own life in his grief. The captured women, who had lived in Achilles' tent and witnessed his kindness and his love for Patroclus, emerged wailing, their cries joining with Achilles' in a chorus of mourning that seemed to shake the very earth. From the depths of the sea, Thetis heard her son's anguish. She came with her sister Nereids, rising from the waves like figures of mist and silver light, and she found Achilles sprawled in the dust, utterly broken. She lifted his head, cradling it in her lap as she had when he was a child, and she wept with him. "Why are you crying, my son?" she asked, though she knew already. "Zeus has granted what you prayed for. The Greeks have been humbled, driven to the brink of defeat. Your honor has been vindicated. So why this terrible grief?" "What good is honor?" Achilles sobbed, his voice cracked and raw. "When Patroclus is dead, what does glory matter when I've lost the one I loved beyond all others? I let him go into battle wearing my armor, sent him to his death because of my cursed pride, and now he's gone. Mother, he's gone, and I can never bring him back." Thetis held her son as he wept, and her own tears fell like rain. She had foreseen this moment, or something like it, had known that loving Patroclus would bring her son both joy and devastating grief. But she had not interfered because even gods cannot shield their children from the costs of love. When Achilles finally had cried himself into exhaustion, when the first storm of grief had passed leaving him hollow and shaking, his mother spoke. "Hector has your armor. If you mean to avenge Patroclus, and I can see in your eyes that you do. You will need new arms. Wait one day. Let me go to Hephaestus and beg him to forge you armor worthy of your purpose. Tomorrow you will have what you need." "Tomorrow," Achilles said, and in his voice was the rage that would soon make him legend. "How can I wait even 1 hour? Patroclus lies dead, and his killer walks free. I should go now, tear Hector apart with my bare hands." "Wait," Thetis insisted. "One day, Hector will not escape you, but you need armor. Promise me you'll wait." Reluctantly, Achilles agreed, and Thetis departed for Olympus. But Achilles could not simply sit in his tent. He went to where Patroclus's body lay, carried back by the Greeks but not yet prepared for burial. The sight of it nearly undid him again. Patroclus, always so gentle and alive, now still and silent forever. Achilles fell upon the body, embracing it, kissing the cold forehead, weeping into the blood-matted hair. He would not let them take it away, would not allow them to wash it or prepare it for the pyre. He held Patroclus through the night, as though by refusing to let go, he could somehow keep his friend from departing completely. The other Greeks were horrified and moved by this display. They had seen warriors grieve before, but this was something else entirely. This was a man confronting the annihilation of his world, the loss of the one thing that had given his life meaning. Even those who had questioned the depth of feeling between Achilles and Patroclus understood now. Whatever they had been to each other, friends, brothers, lovers, something that transcended all such labels, it had been profound beyond measure. As the night wore on, Achilles finally released the body long enough to let the women clean it and anoint it with oils. But he would not let them take Patroclus to the tent prepared for the dead. Instead, the body was brought to Achilles' own tent, placed on Patroclus's pallet, and there Achilles lay down beside it, as they had slept side by side for so many years. "I'm sorry," Achilles whispered into the unhearing darkness. "I'm so sorry. I should have fought. I should have swallowed my pride and protected you. This is my fault, my doing. You died because of my arrogance, my stubbornness. How can I live with that? How can I continue when you're gone?" There was no answer, only the sound of the sea outside and the quiet movements of the camp settling into nervous sleep. Achilles did not sleep. He lay beside Patroclus, one hand resting on the cold chest, and through the long hours of darkness, he made his plans. He would kill Hector. That much was certain, but it would not be a clean kill, a quick death in honorable combat. No, Hector would pay for what he had done, would suffer as Achilles suffered. And after Hector fell, Achilles would continue killing until the Trojans were annihilated or until someone finally managed to strike him down. He did not care which outcome came first. Without Patroclus, life held no meaning. Glory was ashes. Even the promise of immortal fame felt hollow. Before dawn, Thetis returned with the armor Hephaestus had forged through the night. Magnificent pieces that shone like the sun itself, crafted with such skill that the gods themselves might have envied them. The shield in particular was a work of art, its surface depicting the entire world, from cities at peace to cities at war, from farmers working fields to dancers at festivals. It was as if Hephaestus had tried to capture all of life itself on that gleaming bronze surface. Achilles put on the armor without comment, his face set in grim lines. When he was fully armed, he looked like something more than human, a figure of divine wrath, terrible and beautiful, a force of nature rather than a man. The Myrmidons who saw him were awed and terrified in equal measure. But before going to battle, Achilles did something that shocked the assembly of Greek leaders. He called them together and stood before them in his new armor, and he spoke words no one expected. "I was wrong. My quarrel with Agamemnon, my withdrawal from battle, it cost us too much. Cost me everything. Patroclus is dead because of my pride, and I can never undo that. So I'm ending this now. I will fight again, not for Agamemnon, not for honor, but for Patroclus, to avenge him. After that, I don't care what happens." It was as close to an apology as Achilles was capable of giving, and the Greek leaders accepted it with relief. They needed their champion, even one consumed by grief and rage. They would take what they could get. Before leaving for battle, Achilles returned one last time to his tent, to where Patroclus lay. He knelt beside the body, and in a voice barely above a whisper, he made a vow. "Wait for me in the halls of Hades. I won't be far behind you, and when I die, I'll make sure they burn us together, mix our ashes, bury them in the same urn. Even death won't separate us. I promise you that." Then he rose, picked up his new spear, and walked out into the morning light to write the final chapter of his legend in Trojan blood. What followed became the stuff of legend. Achilles' rampage through the Trojan ranks, leaving such devastation in his wake that even the gods were moved to intervene. He killed without mercy, without hesitation, cutting through enemy warriors like wheat before a scythe. He filled the river Scamander with so many corpses that the river god himself rose in fury, trying to drown Achilles in retaliation. But not even the gods could stop him now, for he fought with the strength of grief, with rage that transcended mortal limits. And then came the moment when Achilles faced Hector outside the walls of Troy. Hector, brave as he was, tried to run at first, understanding too late what he faced. 3 times he circled Troy's walls with Achilles pursuing, while all of Troy watched from above and the gods watched from Olympus. Finally, abandoned by divine protection, Hector turned to face his doom. The fight was brief. Achilles' spear found Hector's throat, and as the Trojan prince fell, Achilles leaned close and spoke words meant for him alone. "You killed Patroclus. That was your death sentence. Know as you die that I will desecrate your body, feed it to dogs and birds, make your end as shameful as his was honorable." Hector, with his last breaths, begged Achilles to return his body to his family for proper burial, offering ransom, appealing to human decency. But Achilles was beyond such appeals. "I wish I could bring myself to eat your flesh raw," he snarled. "There is no recompense, no payment that will save you from my wrath." And he kept his word. For 12 days, Achilles abused Hector's corpse, dragging it behind his chariot around Troy's walls, refusing burial rites, trying through outward violence to match the inner devastation he felt. Yet the gods protected the body from decay, and finally, they sent King Priam, Hector's father, to Achilles' tent to beg for his son's return. That meeting, an old king kneeling before the man who had killed his son, kissing the hands that had dealt the death blow, finally cracked something in Achilles' grief. Priam spoke of Peleus, reminded Achilles of his own father who would one day mourn him as Priam now mourned Hector. And in that moment, Achilles saw himself reflected in the old king's pain, understood that grief was universal, that Hector had been loved as Patroclus had been loved. He wept then, but differently, not the howling anguish of those first days, but quiet tears of recognition and release. He returned Hector's body, granted a truce for the burial rites, and for the first time since Patroclus' death, felt something of his humanity return. But grief's lessening did not mean grief's ending. Achilles still carried the wound of loss, still felt Patroclus' absence like a physical ache. He organized elaborate funeral games in Patroclus' honor. Chariot races, boxing matches, wrestling contests, archery competitions with prizes for the winners. All of Greece competed, celebrating the memory of a man who had been gentle and wise, who had been Achilles' better half. When it came time for Patroclus' cremation, Achilles made good on his promise. He slaughtered 12 Trojan prisoners on the funeral pyre, an act of brutal vengeance that shocked even hardened warriors. He sacrificed horses and dogs that Patroclus had loved. He cut a lock of his own hair, the lock he had promised to his father and that represented his dedication to youth and life, and placed it in Patroclus's hands before the flames consumed everything. As the pyre burned through the night, Achilles stood watching, calling out to Patroclus's spirit, speaking to him as though he could still hear. "Wait for me. I'm coming. Not yet, but soon. And when I do, they'll put us together, just as I promised. We'll rest side by side for eternity." When morning came and the ashes had cooled, Achilles personally gathered them, placing them in a golden urn that would wait for his own ashes to join them. He erected a mound over the site, marking it as a place where two great souls would one day share eternal rest. The remaining time Achilles had on earth was short, as his mother had always warned. Paris, aided by Apollo, shot the arrow that found Achilles' heel, the one vulnerable spot on his body, and Greece's greatest warrior fell at last. He died at the peak of his glory, just as prophecy had foretold, cut down in youth but assured of immortal fame. When Achilles' funeral came, his body was burned with the same honors he had given Patroclus, and according to his wishes, his ashes were mixed with Patroclus's in that golden urn, the two of them inseparable in death as they had been in life. The mound that covered them became a landmark, visible to ships passing by, a monument not just to individual heroes but to the bond between them. In the years and centuries that followed, poets would sing of Achilles and Patroclus. The Greeks would debate the nature of their relationship. Were they lovers? Close friends? Something that transcended such simple categorizations? But to those who knew them, who had watched them together in life, the answer was clear. They were each other's everything, bound by a love so profound that not even death could sever it. Their story became a model for the deepest form of friendship, the kind where two souls recognize each other as essential, where loyalty is absolute and sacrifice comes without question. Philosophers like Plato would reference them in discussions of love's highest forms. Warriors would invoke their names as examples of perfect companionship. Lovers of all kinds would see in their devotion a reflection of their own deepest connections. And on clear nights, when the stars shine as brightly as they did over the Trojan camp so long ago, one can imagine two figures lying side by side beneath that vast canopy, speaking of philosophy and fate, tracing constellations with pointing fingers, existing in that perfect understanding that requires no words. The stars that witnessed their silent moments under Troy's sky still shine, and somewhere in their light, the bond between Achilles and Patroclus endures, proof that some things, some connections are eternal. Their tomb stood for centuries, a pilgrimage site for those who understood that true love, in whatever form it takes, is the most valuable thing we possess. Alexander the Great, centuries later, would visit their grave and honor them both, seeing in their relationship a model for his own devotion to his companion Hephaestion. Countless others would come, would stand before that mound of earth covering mixed ashes, and would feel the echo of a bond that death could not diminish. This was the legacy of Achilles and Patroclus. Not just glory won in battle, not just names preserved in song, but something more precious and more rare. They showed that in a world of chaos and violence, of divine caprice and mortal suffering, it is possible to find someone who makes existence not just bearable, but beautiful. They proved that loyalty and love can survive even the worst that fate has to offer, that the bonds we forge with chosen companions can be stronger than blood, more enduring than stone. And so we leave them there, beneath their mound, their ashes mixed forever, the stars wheeling overhead as they always have, as they always will. Two souls who found in each other completion, who gave each other strength and wisdom, who loved so deeply that millennia later, their story still has the power to move us, to remind us what matters, to show us that at the end of all things, it is the connections we make, the love we give and receive, that defines us. Rest now, as Achilles and Patroclus rest. Let their story carry you gently into sleep, into dreams where bonds are unbreakable and love transcends all boundaries. Let the knowledge of their enduring devotion comfort you, remind you of your own connections, your own loves, the people who make your life complete. And know that somewhere, under stars that have shone for thousands of years, their bond continues, eternal and unshaken, a testament to the power of love in all its forms. Sleep now, dear listener. Sleep peacefully, under the same stars that watched over them, protected by the knowledge that some things, loyalty, friendship, love, are truly eternal. Good night. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time, walking beside Achilles and Patroclus through their years together under the stars of Troy. Their story, though ancient, speaks to something timeless in all of us. Our need for connection, our capacity for devotion, our ability to find meaning in the bonds we forge with those who understand us most deeply. If you found comfort in this tale, if it helped carry you toward peaceful rest, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing to History's Sleep Stories. There are many more journeys we can take together through the rich world of mythology and legend, each one crafted to bring you the gentle, restorative sleep you deserve. And if you'd like to support the creation of more content like this, a simple like on this video helps more than you might imagine. It tells me that these stories matter to you, that there's value in exploring the past to find comfort in the present. Until next time, may your dreams be peaceful, your rest be deep, and may you find in your own life the kind of connection that Achilles and Patroclus shared, bonds that endure, love that transcends, and loyalty that never wavers. Good night and sleep well.